Hi, everybody. My name is Jill Sitnick. I am the Journey Sage on YouTube and my website. And I advocate for MDMA therapy for PTSD, which is on the docket to be FDA approved in August 2024, like literally right around the corner. And I advocate for this therapy because in 2020, I went through it. I was diagnosed with PTSD due to some pretty horrific childhood trauma that I basically ignored until my late 40s. And when I went through the therapy, 1 year, 3 therapeutic journeys, and was no longer suicidal and could see a future for myself, and was no longer hyper vigilant that, the universe was after me. I thought it was important to share my story because of the stigma that surrounds psychedelics. And that's why we're chatting today. I like to continue having this conversation with folks.
And I think it's a conversation that needs to be had because maybe some people think there's only one way to treat something. Let's say PTSD, right?
Mhm.
There's only one way to treat a fall. There's only one way to treat a breakup, right? But you mentioned that you've gone through it, and you mentioned suicidal thoughts. And one thing that I learned about suicidal thoughts is there's a lot of people who have those type of thoughts, but they may not always proceed with the actual act itself, right? So when you were experiencing that, what was causing you to have those kind of thoughts at that point in time?
Well, so my longtime partner of over 20 years passed away. And after the widow's fog started to dissipate, about 18 months after he passed away, I got a work email that was on a scale of 1 to 10, it was a 1. But my nervous system, I think, had just had enough. And I interpreted this work email at a level 10 that I was going to lose my job. I was never going to be able to find another job. I was going to lose my house. I was going to be living in my car with, and at that point, I had a dog and a bird. Like, and all of that was going to happen in a month. You know, reality, reality, and I'm pointing to my head for those folks who are listening, reality versus what my body was experiencing. My body felt like the universe was out after me. I was running from a wild animal or something terrifying, and I was just in this hyper vigilant state. And after a couple of months of that, where nothing happened, but I was still in this really hyper state with my nervous system, I went back to my therapist that had worked with me with my grief work because she always let me pick up and put down therapy. And the talk therapy, to be quite frank, was not working. I had this trusted relationship and I was getting tired. And when you are constantly scared and you don't see any break in getting scared, that's when you question, or at least I questioned, why am I here? If this is what life is, if this is what life is now, I don't think I want to be here. And so that was my experience with getting closer and closer to suicidal behavior. I think what also feeds into it, my mother attempted suicide multiple times in her life. It wasn't this foreign thing that happened to other people. Like my mother's arms were a roadmap as to how I could slit my wrists. And so it was a very real thing. And when my therapist suggested this healing modality, I could have gone on and on for months theoretically, but I was getting closer and closer to just, if this is the way life is, I'm done, I'm out.
And I want to hone on that a little bit because I know sometimes some people who maybe they don't have the experience that you have when it comes to suicide or unaliving themselves or even self-deletion, they may ask, well, can't you just talk through it? Can't you just, right? Think of something positive. Can I just give you a hug? And it'll make it all better. But I think that what the disconnect is, at least from my observation, is that when you have those thoughts, it becomes potentially an option, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where some people may think that, okay, if I'm having a bad day, these are my options. It's either I can try to focus on something else, I can busy my mind, I can go outside. Whereas someone who has those thoughts is, yes, I have those three things as my options, but my fourth is this, right? Would that be an accurate way to explain it?
I think that's an accurate way to explain it when you're looking at PTSD and suicide options from an intellectual perspective. And I'd like to throw out there the physical perspective. And when I say physical, I mean in the body. So there's a great book, The Body Keeps the Score by Vanderkolt, and he's online and things of that sort. I didn't believe my therapist when she argued with my therapist when she diagnosed me with PTSD. I was a corporate gal. I was killing it in every other part of my life. I was like, have you met me? I don't have PTSD. Well, she had me read this book. And what I learned is that my body's physical response to current events was really my body's learned response to trauma from way back when. I mean, like 30 years before. And so it's easy to say, mentally, come on, think your way out of it, do something else. But when your body, I want your audience to kind of think of something they know would really terrify them. A lot of people would be public speaking with like 1,000 people, or jumping out of a plane, like how your body would start to feel. That's how a PTSD reaction very often feels. It might differ between people, like what actually they feel in their body, but their body gets upset, and that's what's really hard to ignore. You can't, unfortunately, we are not good at like outthinking our body, outthinking our trauma. There's a line, the issue is in the tissues. The issues are very rarely up here when it comes to PTSD. They're more realistically in the body. So it's a real challenge.
It is, and I think that's where probably a lot of people on the outside miss. They miss the physical. It's like I feel this way, right? Because it's one thing, right, to think, okay, I'm not having a good day. These are my options, which could include that. But I feel like going outside is not going to help. I feel like this isn't going to work. But this option here, it doesn't
What
feel as
stop
bad, right?
what would stop the body from hurting like that? Not being around anymore.
Yes, yes. So when you mention the PTSD,
Yeah.
for those who maybe, because as you mentioned, right, you're a corporate person, you're very successful, and you're like, have you met Jill? Me? Right? You know, have you met me? But you were going through it. And some people will look at you and be like, if she's able to go through this, and now here comes the comparison, right? I don't have what she has. I don't have maybe the happiness, the big smile, the big hair, right? I don't have these things. So does that mean that I could be going through it too? So how would you maybe help people identify if they're going through PTSD themselves?
You know what? I think that's a fantastic question, because we wouldn't have been able to have this conversation when I was in the midst of my PTSD. Everyone is seeing the highlight reel now. Everyone is seeing the after. And I can totally understand how people would look at me now chatting with you saying, oh, shouldn't have, what is she talking about? They didn't see the tears. They didn't see the year of kind of torment. It's really hard to go into your trauma. That's why I wound up writing the memoir about it, to really explain to people what this therapy is. For me, the signs of PTSD: constant rumination. I always thought I was kind of an anxious person. My long-term partner, Carl, he had kind of regulated my nervous system. So I was always able to kind of talk through things that would upset me, and having an empathic witness would always calm me down. So the rumination, the fear I've just kind of resolved a different kind of fear. I mean, my childhood was based on a domestic abuser who worked to make sure you were scared of him. And so there was always this level of fear, and this fear of making a mistake. And if I made a mistake, my heart rate would go up, my palms, like, and I think my entire life, my shoulders were up to my ears, like I was constantly tense. So what I say to folks is, when they're trying to say, well, how do I really know if I'm having a PTSD episode? Look to your body. Your body, if you can't actually calm your body down to go do something else, I would suggest you might be in a PTSD I was calling it like a storm. I think there's a video where I called it like a PTSD storm because that's how it kind of feels for me. It's this like tornado that I just can't calm down. And just imagine living that way for months and never feeling a sense of safety. So for me, it was a lot about the universe is out to get me. I don't feel safe. I've done everything I possibly can. I have backup plans from A to Z, and yet I still don't feel safe. And if everything I've done can't make me safe, I don't have any other ideas, I'm done. So I hope that helps folks. It's kind of like when you have just these uncontrollable thoughts that on some level are not real, but on another level, boy, they feel real.
And listen to your body, everyone, please. Like your body is such a huge
Yeah.
indicator of what you're going through. Like you mentioned a fantastic book, which is on my reading list. Your body keeps a score. It was actually recommended to me by someone who was going through trauma and they were trying to deal with it like you were, right? But when they're going through it, I think so many people they're like, nope, I don't want to hear anything else, right? And then someone recommended something like, oh, this is why my body does this. This is why sometimes when I'm sitting, I feel this like rush, right? Just tense up right through my body. Like what I want to make clear to those listening, and Joe, maybe you can help me out, is how important is it to listen to what your body is telling you and don't think, you know what, it'll pass in a couple of minutes.
Oh, I'm applaud, applaud. Let's put that on billboards. Yes, that's the message. And people in my generation, I'm Generation X, we had zero understanding of trauma. I saw my mother go through therapist after therapist, through prescription. I had very little respect for the mental health industry. That's the way that I looked at it, looking at my mom. And if this book had been around for my mother, because she thought it was all in her head. I mean, and the constant treatment was, well, if you're having mental issues, it's all in your head. And what we have since learned more about trauma is that trauma is I'm going to use the word unhealed, but there's probably about 50 other words you could use. Unhealed emotions, emotions that we experienced as children that we couldn't resolve. I could never resolve the fear of my household because my father was always there. There was no one else to turn around and hug me and say, don't worry, it's going to be safe. Because guess what? It wasn't safe. My body, that toddler, I always go back to the toddler, that toddler learned that's how the world is. And so to protect her, my body went into a response mode of hypervigilance whenever I thought that something was scary. And when it gets kind of laid out that way, that our body holds on, it's like instinct. Like that's our instinct to protect ourselves. So we just didn't have, at least in where I grew up, I'm in the northeast of the United States, or at least my generation, we didn't have any understanding of that. And so now the gift of kind of, and I'm sure there's going to be more research that comes out, I'm sure there's more to learn, but the gift of understanding, oh wait, what my body is doing is actually giving me messages about what it learned when it was really young, and I can go ahead and change that through a variety of healing modalities now.
Someone, when you mentioned that, and I don't want to age you, Joe, trust me.
No, it's okay. No, it's okay.
I remember someone told me of, who's Gen X, and they said that when they were growing up, it was treated like trauma, mental health, and things of that nature. It was treated like you were possessed. It was like witchcraft, like way back in the day, right? They're like, okay,
Oh,
you know what? Something is wrong with you. You need to go maybe to the church or the temple, whatever the case is, and we'll get you fixed,
oh,
right? Because that mentality, like some people actually had that mentality where it's like, yeah, you're going through something, but it's not what you think it is. It's like the devil or
yeah,
some like
yeah.
evil spirit. But what she was sharing and comparing it was similar to you, where it's like, you know what? We've seen our family members go through it, And a lot of times people weren't talking about it because it was just that generation, right? And then maybe you had some people who are similar to her story, where it's like, okay, you know what? They're just possessed. And then there's another part where it's like, no, we have to do some work here. We have to figure out what is going on, because if there's something wrong with me and there's something wrong with my child, if I can't fix me, how am I going to help fix them? Right? So like when you're looking at your situation and the person was always there,
Yeah.
did you get a
Give you
sense that, hey, is this actually how life is supposed to be? Is this normal?
Actually, it's really funny you ask that. People have asked me, with the background that I came from, how I managed to become corporate Jill and make my way out of it, because I came from domestic abuse, suicide, drugs, poverty. I know what it was like to be food insecure. I know what it was like to be housing insecure. Put myself through college living on pasta. Um, but I just lost my train of thought. I know what it's like to have been in that situation. One of the you know what, I forget the question, but I wanted to go back to my mother talking about being defective. What was your question? Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. It literally just went
So
out of
like
my.
like growing up in a traumatic with a traumatic childhood and then raising that, did you think that that was normal
Oh,
because you're going through it?
okay. Now I know why I went down that rabbit hole. I'm so sorry. I had this really weird take on, even as a child, that I looked at my two parents and I knew I didn't want to be like them. Like, I think at some point, and this is my theory, I think at some point children look at their parents and they say, "Ooh, I want to be like them," or "Ooh, I want to be the opposite." And it was very, very young for me that I looked at my parents and just said, "I don't want to be this way." And I think that that's was very, very helpful for me, kind of. I don't know how I'm going to get out of this. I don't know what I'm going to do. Boy, I'm going to work my butt off, and I'm not going to live my life the way that these two people have lived their lives. And I see that a lot when I'm talking to people who are still kind of in the trajectory of their parents, and other people like me who just said, no, that's just not going to work for me. I didn't know what the other way was, but there has to be another way. So from very early on. And I think the other thing, you mentioned something about being um, possessed when I was young. So I will age myself. I'm 54. So in the 70s, so I was born 1970, and my mother was attempting suicide pretty much through 1 through 5, or 0 through 5. And at 5, she actually tried to kill herself with a shotgun wound. So it was progressing. Never, ever, ever did anybody that I know of say, let's look at your environment. It was all on her. She was defective. There was something wrong with her. And it took me a long time. I knew from a bit of therapy when I was younger that her suicide attempts were not my fault, or I didn't cause them. What I didn't know was that she wasn't trying to abandon me. And it was something I healed as an adult, that for a long time I was kind of angry at her. You were just going to leave me there? Like, you just wanted to get away? And reality was, she was that desperate to try to escape. I mean, my father was pretty horrific. So it was really interesting, your comment about there's something possessing you. In my mother's case, she was absolutely written off, that you're just defective. That was sad.
It is, because I think that's like a way of dismissing it, right? And we do that, not you and I now. We do that. People in general do that so often when it comes to anything that they don't want to face head on.
Yeah.
They'll make an excuse that they probably don't believe,
Yeah.
but they're saying that, yeah, it must be this. You know what? It's the devil, or it's this person is defective,
Something wrong
or
with you. You can't be
yeah,
fixed. Yeah.
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 Instead of saying that, you know what, I'm going through something, I need help.
Yeah.
You know, and I wonder how many people can honestly sit themselves down, look in the mirror, and say, you know what, I need help. Like one of my friends, since
Mm.
you mentioned therapy, and I shared this a little few days ago, and the reason why I share it is because it's so fresh in my mind, and it was in a way, in a way, it was upsetting because we've known each other quite a long time, and we had a conversation about like therapy and mentors and coaches, and I was sharing that even I, as perfect as some of my friends may think I am, even I speak to someone, right? Because they see, oh, you have a house, you have a car, you have a good job, whatever.
Yeah.
And then he mentioned, well, he doesn't need like therapy or coaches, but he knows exactly what's wrong with him. So I was like, okay, what is wrong? What do you think is wrong with you? So he mentioned it. I was like, but you've been dealing with that for like the last 10 years. So I'm like, the point of therapy is to get you over the hump,
Right.
right? It's not what you see on TV where you have the electric bolts and and the whips. It's nothing like that. And I told him, I was like, your issue is escalating. He's like, what in one way? I was like, well, 10 years ago, it was you had slight anger management issues, right? Like if someone did something, you would explode. So it was more reactive, wasn't proactive. I'm like, but now it's proactive. And now you're
Oh,
saying that you don't like people. So it's escalating as you get older. And the longer you're in it, the more difficult it's going to be to fix it. I'm like, it's been 10 years. So it's
yeah.
like, you may know what your problem is, but you don't know how to correct it. Or, which I think is the case with a lot of people, you don't want to,
Mm.
right? Because it's easier to talk to someone and not do work versus when you pay someone, now you're kind of like, okay, I got to do something because I'm spending my time, I'm spending my money. Because I think a lot of people get caught up in being the telephone therapist or the sofa therapist. Like your
Mm.
friends will dump and dump and dump, and then you don't realize how it impacts you until you take a step back and you're like, whoa, I have PTSD from my friend.
Sure.
Fair enough, right? Because it's triggering, especially let's say, for example, like you've gone through things in your childhood, things like that. So imagine if someone were to come to you and they're sharing all these problems, and in a way it's triggering you, and you know the work that you did, but they may not be aware or they may have forgotten, and then now they're discounting everything you've gone through. They're like, oh, I don't need that, I don't need that. And you're like, maybe you do, because it's helped me and I was there maybe at one point. So what are your thoughts?
Well, so I think a few things. And I don't want to go down rabbit holes and then have to ask you to remind me of the question. I do think, are you familiar at all with IFS, internal family systems?
No, no, I'm not.
Okay. Super, uh, a super easy way to think about therapy. And don't get me wrong, I like internal family systems can be very complicated, but at a very fundamental level, So the Dr. Schwartz fans don't come after me here. I'm doing like a 101 of IFS. The idea that when we go through trauma as children, our coping mechanisms in IFS language become protectors. So the same way that maybe you got angry as a child and you got some sort of safety response, it made you safe. Then as an adult, you might choose anger. Me, it was people pleasing. Uh, People pleasing and being codependent on my parents and really paying attention to where their emotions were and really not having the option of having my own emotions, but just trying to keep everything as calm as possible so I wouldn't get hit, so I wouldn't get thrown out, that kind of stuff. That people pleasing is a protector in internal family systems in their definition. So just think about a lot of your behaviors. If you label them as protectors, they're protecting you from something you saw in childhood that could be dangerous. So very often what I see when people are resistant to going towards the pain is there's a protector there, because the protector says, well, wait a minute, this is the strategy we've used our entire life to make sure we don't get hurt. What are you trying to do? Upload the Apple cart? Like, what do you think is going to happen if you get rid of me? And a lot of therapy is all about, and I'm just going to continue to use the IFS system, but people can use whatever system they want. It's just a really easy way to describe it. A lot of times, soothing that protector or being the parent that that protector needed back then, it's called like reparenting yourself. All of a sudden, that resistance kind of goes away. The challenge is that we have a bunch of protectors. We all grew up. We all had stuff happening to us. And so some protectors are super, super strong. Some protectors kind of wait in the background and they only show up occasionally. So whenever I see folks that are resistant to getting help, in my mind, it completely makes sense because there's a protector or several protectors that are saying, whoa, 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 we've used these strategies and we've stayed safe. If you kind of start messing around and you don't have this, you don't need this protector anymore, well, you're not safe. Like that's kind of how our internal system, according to that philosophy, goes. So I hope that helps clarify it. Whenever I look at resistance, I faced a ton of resistance during my treatment. I was scared as to, if I get rid of my anxiety behavior, am I still going to have the level, the work ethic that I have? Am I still going to have my skill set? Am I just going to be like lazing around on the sofa watching movies all day? Like these are the strategies I've used. And what I found is that the strategies or the positive things in my life, my work ethic, my curiosity, my wanting to kind of see what happens, right? Those necessarily weren't anxiety behaviors, but maybe the pace of them and the urgency of them, that was the trauma response protective behaviors. And so I totally get it. It is really, really scary to think about getting help because you've lived a certain way your entire life, again, using IFS with these protectors. And all of a sudden you're like, wait, I'm going to kind of mess with the protectors. What's my life going to be like? I totally get it because I lived it. Every single therapeutic journey, massive resistance because you just don't know what it's like to live in a comfortable body. You don't know what it's like to actually feel secure. And so it's really scary.
It can be, and to use your example that you gave and that system, it's like you're there, your protectors are like this barrier that's keeping out what's bad, or at least what's potentially bad,
Right.
right? And
Right.
then every once in a while someone comes along that says, hey, outside of that barrier, it's okay. Just take a look. Just peek over it. And you're like, no, I don't know if I can, right? But is that where maybe people like you, people like me, or the therapy you talk about say, hey, why don't we do it together?
Oh, absolutely. When I talk about MDMA therapy for PTSD, I'm very, very clear that it was a therapy modality. It was not me taking ecstasy or Molly and going and hanging out at the club. It was me taking medical grade MDMA with a therapist and an experienced guide, sitting for 5 to 8 hours, and when those protectors would come up or when those fears would come up, number one, MDMA calms the body's response. So I always put my hands to my shoulders because it calms the body's response. So you're not having that physical fear response to whatever you're talking about, number one. Number two, you've got empathic witnesses who, maybe I didn't have anybody when, my father threw me down the stairs when I was a kid to comfort me. But when I talk about it under the influence of MDMA with my two empathic witnesses, and they say, that was awful. That's not how a child should be treated. And you're like, oh, like all of a sudden things start to shift, and those protectors can kind of say, oh, wait a minute, maybe this isn't how life is. Maybe the way I perceived life when I was a toddler is not really the way life is. And that's kind of the way that MDMA therapy works. It allows you to reframe those memories, and those protectors that were in place, they can kind of relax and chill out and be like, oh, okay, the world isn't quite so scary. It was really just your 230-pound, 6'2" father.
What are some of the ways that someone can get involved in this type of therapy, or at least learn a little bit more to understand that, hey, there's some benefits to this, and it may be something that they want to start doing, or at least get involved with?
Right, right. Well, so the first place to go, when my therapist basically said, hey, you've had PTSD, you've been here for a couple of months, talk therapy is not working. She happened to be in a psychedelic assisted psychotherapy program. And I was Generation X, eggs in the frying pan, was not, I saw all the medications my mother took. I was not on board. And she said, go look at maps.org, maps.org. They are the folks at the time, a nonprofit that was running the clinical trials on MDMA for PTSD, primarily for the veteran population eventually. That's how they kind of got the government to even kind of go along with, hey, we want to run these clinical trials on a Schedule 1 drug. So at the time, they were through their second clinical trial, and 3/4 of the people who went through the trial who had treatment resistance PTSD, like PTSD for years, which I can't even imagine. Um, they had and I was an English major, so I always round numbers. They had on average like 3/4 of the people after 3 sessions no longer qualified for a PTSD diagnosis. It wasn't that all their trauma was magically gone. It was that they were no longer suicidal. They were no longer hypervigilant, like all those things we talked about earlier. And so when I looked at the research, that's when I changed my mind. So that's always where I send people first. Go to MAPS. You can look at all of their research. If you are a research person and love reading statistics, you can actually see the published papers in the Nature journal. I'm not that person. I get lost in all those numbers very quickly, but it's a great place to go. And you can start to understand how this therapy works. My channel is a great channel from a patient point of view to kind of explain it. We are all crossing our fingers and doing a dance that August 11th, next month, 2024, the application from the for-profit company. So MAPS is a nonprofit, the for-profit company, Lycos, they actually submitted the application to the FDA, and we are hopeful that it will be approved. There's a little bit of static right now. The FDA advisory committee voted no for a couple of different reasons. I don't know if we want to go down that rabbit hole. But the PR machine is strong right now. So if you do any sort of research for MDMA, for PTSD, you're going to see a lot of advocates out there saying, I know for a fact this helped this veteran XYZ, this person XYZ. So it's not available yet in the US. It's only available in Australia right now. It's very pricey in Australia. I think I read an article that only 4 people have actually gone through the therapy because it's really kind of pricey, and they're figuring it out. I mean, literally, it's only been available for 1 year. Once we approve, I'm just going to be super positive. Once it's FDA approved, the DEA then has 3 months to reschedule MDMA so that clinicians can use it. So I would anticipate that 2025, we should start to see availability, but I'm hesitant to be super enthusiastic just yet, only because we don't know what the costs are going to be. I mean, you have 2 professionals sitting with you for 8 hours, plus, and you have to actually go to a place. You're not going to be able to pick up a prescription and do this at home. You're going to have to go somewhere to do this. You're going to have people who are trained. It's going to be pricey in the very beginning. So I talk about it in an effort to bring awareness, knowing that for most people, it's still a little bit of a ways, but take a look at it because there are also other medicines that are in the research pipeline that could potentially help people depending on their diagnosis. So that's usually what I say to folks. I wish I was like, oh, here you go right to this place, but we're just not at that point just yet.
When you consider how this therapy has impacted you so positively and you're now an advocate from a patient standpoint, and then when you reflect maybe on what you've gone through, how different are the two versions of Jill when you do a comparison between the two?
Oh, the biggest, the easiest way I can explain it to people is that I have the capacity to feel joy now. And I know that seems really basic, and people will be like, what are you talking about? When I was in my PTSD doom spiral, well, first of all, I lost my partner. That was pretty horrific. And then the PTSD, and then the year of healing. And healing means bringing up all that awfulness that created the problem to begin with. There was not a lot of joy. there was not a lot of excitement. There was not a lot of fun. I would say on a scale of 1 to 10, maybe like a 0 to a 1. There were some tough years. The highlight reel that you're seeing right now is the ability to be excited about life, the ability to know that the universe is actively not looking at my success in an effort to smack me down. There's potential. There's things to get excited about. There's joy out there. And I know it's super fundamental, but I think that people out there who have experienced PTSD in any way, shape, or form, whether it's occasional flashbacks or the body's flipping out, or if they're feeling suicidal, joy and excitement, they just don't exist for whatever the reason with that person. And that's, I think, the biggest difference. This therapy has enabled my life in that I can look forward to things. I can feel joy. I can feel excitement.
It's like when you're asking someone how they're feeling, they say fine. You don't ever hear I'm joyous, or you don't hear an example of joy. And you may mention that it's pretty basic, but could you name five people off the top of your head that shared a joyful moment with you recently?
Right. Right. And simple stuff. I was just hanging out with my girlfriend at the beach, and you know what we did? One night we cooked stupid stuff, like stuff we wanted to try, lemon pasta and these meatballs and the drink we like this silly stuff, but we were really excited because it was like we don't know if this is going to be good. This is an experiment. It was like the ultimate girls' meal, right? Just getting excited about that, feeling the joy and experiencing the curiosity, those are emotions that I would not have been able to tap in. I might have been able to go through the motions, but I certainly wouldn't have been feeling them back when I was going through my PTSD cycles.
So as we close, Jill, what final words or of advice that you want to share with our audience today?
I really hope that this conversation, and we didn't really get specifically into the therapy, which is totally fine. People can go research it, go look at my channel, and they can understand the therapy. But my big message is that these psychedelic medicines, along with qualified therapeutic professionals, can change lives. And so if you're sitting there saying, oh, she just did some drugs, I would encourage you, go online, go look at the clinical research. I just went to Gov Clinical Trials today. There are over 590 clinical trials that have passed or are ongoing or planned around psychedelics. This is not a fringe thing. This is a new kind of healing modality. And I just encourage people to have an open mind, forget about the egg in the frying pan stuff that I grew up with, and look with fresh eyes, because until we start to face the stigma head on, we're going to continue to have millions of people with mental health issues that can be helped. And wouldn't that be terrible if we couldn't just take a second look? And so that's what I encourage people to do.